And there we are. Hi, everyone. It's Sir Rithkin, and I'm here tonight with His Royal Highness of Trimaris, Martin, who, along with Zipser and Atenvelt, are probably the longest sitting princes ever in the SCA.
Good chance of that.
Yeah. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me. I know you don't do Facebook, and I appreciate you doing Facebook for me.
No problem.
For us to hear about your journey a little bit. So you've watched a couple of these, so you know that, yeah. So we sort of start with your origin story. So if you want to start there, that would be great.
Sure. My origin is thankfully becoming less unusual than it used to be, but I actually was born into the SCA.
Oh, so you're second gen.
I am.
That's cool.
Born into the SCA, and I don't remember when my first event was, simply because I don't remember that far back.
Right.
But I can remember going as early as 3 or 4 years old.
Wow.
My earliest memory, I think, is sitting on Girth Oldcastle's lap when he was King of the East.
Wow.
The first time.
Wow.
So long time ago.
That's really cool. So did both of your parents play, or?
No, my mom found the SCA in college. My dad found NASA.
Oh.
So their interests did not align in that respect. But my mom was very active, both just as a participant and heavily involved in service to the SCA and her local group. I grew up in Atlantia, in the barony of Windmaster's Hill, the canton of Elagast, for that matter. Although back then it was in the Kingdom of the East.
Okay.
And I think the names were different at the time. It was a different group.
Interesting.
It made for what I really didn't understand until much, much later was a different kind of experience as a younger member than I've come to realize that everybody else had. Because my mom was so active and had been basically my entire young life, up until only a few years ago. My babysitters when I was really young were knights, Sir Ishmael, and guys who no longer play because they're in their 60s and 70s now. But my babysitters were knights and peers, and I played penny. I learned how to play poker from Viscount Brightor.
Wow.
And played with, it was half a dozen knights and me and one of my brothers. And so I didn't even, I guess I could spell pure fear, but it never even occurred to me of what that was until much later when I realized that was a thing for other people.
Yeah, because those were just like your uncles, like.
Kind of, yeah. It was the same when I started fighting. To be honest, for the longest time, I didn't. My path was not in fighting when I started. I had decided that I wanted to be an armorer.
Okay.
And I was working with my good friend who unfortunately is no longer with us, Master Eldred Tremaine from Atlantia, and I made armor and made the occasional plaque belt and other types of jewelry, and I was happy doing it, and didn't have a whole lot of ambitions to fight until probably almost 20, mainly because I had done high school sports and then sports in college, and sufficiently so to generate the injuries that go with that.
Right.
So when those things were no longer in the picture and I was coming back from those types of things, and that's when I decided I wanted to start fighting. and even then, I had the benefit of some of the best instruction I could have gotten in Atlantia. Um, I went to practice when I first decided I wanted to fight. Um, I made a helm with Master Eldred, and my first helm was a bassinet, which is unusual. And he told me, Martin, you better learn how to fight because you got a helm like somebody who knows what they're doing. And he was not wrong, because I got my bell rung quite a few times when I first started. So he kind of introduced me to Duke Anton, who was a count at the time, if I recall, and some of the other established fighters in that area. And so, I'd go to practice, a couple, 2-3 times a week, because I was a college student and I had the time. And the practice that I went to was, 10 people, but 8 of them were knights, and of the 8 knights, 3 of those were royal peers, and then it was my squire brother Keegan and myself.
Deep into the pool.
And he got knighted, 2 years after I started fighting. So I didn't understand how good the instruction I was getting was until I'd moved and it wasn't available to me anymore, and then I missed it greatly.
Did you keep on armoring?
I did for a while, but particularly when I moved, I kind of, without access to Tom, and that's another area where I didn't have the appreciation for the instruction in armoring that I was getting until it wasn't immediately available to me. But a lot of my attraction to that came down to my relationship with Tom, with Eldred, and that. So without that, it wasn't as attractive to me.
I think growing up around all of those people, you probably just had no idea.
Not a clue.
Yeah, until it wasn't there anymore. So did you end up squiring to Anton?
I did. Not at first. It was he had been teaching me for almost 2 years, I think, and I was. I knew that I was going to move to Florida at some point, but I didn't know when. And I started to think about that and what that was going to mean. And I talked to Anton about it, and I asked him if he was interested in taking on any other students, and he says, "About time, Martin." And and so I became his squire. I don't know, at Penzic, and then I moved to Trimeris within 6 months, probably less. But yeah, it was great.
And the sports that you played in high school, did those help you in fighting at all?
Very much so. Football and baseball were my sports. Particularly as there's a lot of discipline and a lot of the approaches to training that I thought were immediately applicable. I mean, if not the specific movements, although there was some crossover, particularly from baseball, actually, from batting. But how to approach training, how to put yourself in the right mindset to be focused on this, and then turn it off when you're done. And of course, the physical conditioning didn't hurt. But yeah, very much I thought that being involved in sports helped me a lot when I was first starting out.
And when you decided to fight in your 20s or at 20, did you,
right around that.
Yeah, did you think, I want to be a knight, or you just wanted to check it out and see if you liked it?
I just wanted to. I wanted to try it at first to do it, just because one, I've been building this armor, and and I had done it a few times, but I hadn't really gotten serious about it. It was just the kind of thing that I did mostly because I wanted the armor.
Right.
And I wouldn't say that I had a talent for it, but I I took instruction very well. And that just kind of, the big motivator for me, even more than winning, is I really, really hate to lose.
Right.
I mean, I really, really hate it. And I lost a lot at practice. The practice that I went to was, 3 world-class fighters all practice there on a regular basis.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like, the practice I started at was very similar, and you don't really realize that you aren't as bad as you think you are until you go somewhere else.
Yeah, my authorization bout was very much like that, because I mean, my only serious exposure to fighting, other than watching it, was fighting with Anton and Duke Kuhn and a host of visitors, Duke Michael, Ragnar, who was no one at the time, but is now a Duke, and all of my squire brothers, whether they were knights at the time or knights shortly thereafter, Count. I mean, it was just a host of folks, and I didn't realize that wasn't the way fighting was everywhere until much later. But my authorization bout, I went out thinking, okay, I'm gonna go out and this guy's probably gonna wipe the floor, but I just need to go and get through and get the card, and so I can go do some stuff. And I won my authorization bout, or bouts plural, like multiple of them. And I'm like, this is not what I was expecting. And that was really kind of my first clue that my fighting experience was not like everybody else's when they first started out fighting.
The practices with Anton, were they structured, or did you guys just fight? Like, did you do drills as well, or?
At the time when I first was starting, he and I would fight just because he lived not far. I mean, he lived close enough where I could go from campus, and I'd go over to his house, and it'd be just me and him fighting. And that was Tuesday night, I think, and we just go and fight, and that was all instruction. It was how to do things, and then drilling to do it. Slow work, Pell work for developing mechanics, and then a comparatively very little amount of actual fighting. Another thing I didn't realize until a year or two in was that he was doing a very good job of fighting just that much above where I was at, so that he wasn't blowing me out. Because I kept thinking, man, I'm getting close. One of these days I'm going to get this old man.
Which is also deceptive, right? Because then you're cranking it up and you're like, why am I not hitting him?
Right. That's exactly. Yeah. And then, later in the week was practice in his front yard. And that was, with the general group. And that was a little less structured, but there was still a lot of structure to it. I mean, there would be some structured stuff at the beginning. And then, the latter half was a lot of just free sparring, but also it would be, where people would fight for a bit, and then they would take a break and talk about what had just happened, and what was happening, what his plan was, what the other guy's plan was, where things went sideways, options for what they could have done differently at particular spots in the bout, and then we do it again.
Yeah, so a real analytical practice.
Very much so. Very much so.
You're very lucky. Not everybody gets that. That's very cool. So you squired to Anton and then you moved. So how did that work
out? It was not without its challenges. Trimeris, Trimeris is a great kingdom. I love it. I love living here. But at the time, Trimeris and Atlantia, there were some challenges in their relationship, as a kingdom, from one kingdom to another, and within some of the more influential members. At the time, this was just after Atlantia and Trimeris used to have a war called Sea Wars, if you're from Atlantia, Sea Raids if you're from Trimeris. And there was some unfortunate animosity that came from that due to some incidents that had happened over those years. And right around the time when I moved to Trimeris was when they stopped doing sea wars and sea raids. And you know, anyone who's met Anton understands that he has a forceful personality, if I can understate that a good bit. Sorry, Doug.
I haven't talked to him yet, so
he's interesting. He's worth the talk. And you know, particularly, you know, he had a very close relationship with Michael at Bedford, and through him, you know, I knew Michael, you know, fairly well, and you know, admired his fighting greatly. And they were kind of the focal point of some of the feelings of discontent on the Trimaran side of that. And that made it a particular challenge being Anton Squire, living in a kingdom that, you know, as a kingdom, albeit there were many people who were great friends of Anton and had good relationships with him. But, you know, overall, there were a number of people in the kingdom who did not share that feeling.
right.
And that made it a bit challenging being a squire in Trimeris. It's terrible to say, but not long after I moved here, Squire Gunnar Oxenmegan, who's my great friend and is as a duke now in Trimeris, but he moved into the kingdom as well. And he and I, along with another friend of ours who was in the military and has since moved, took to calling ourselves at one point Swas, or Squires Without Sires, since we are not in another kingdom. You know, there were that was a situation that presented significant challenges. I mean, such that ultimately Gunnar reigned twice in our kingdom and was a duke before he was knighted. You know, and I narrowly avoided that fate only because I was kingdom seneschal before I got knighted, and I lost in the finals of Crown Tourney. And I'm told later that the conversation in the Knights meeting that day was, you know, we've had enough of that stuff, and we really ought to knight that fool before, you know, we get another unbelted king. Because that was we'd had another unbelted king before that wasn't Gunnar or me, and so that I was announced that day and knighted a couple of months later, which worked out because I did win the next Crown Tourney. So that was my first.
Yeah, when I was looking you up, you got knighted in 2001, and then you were 2002. Yeah. So did you guys do some long distance training, or did you?
Yeah, I you know, I was, you know, working and single and had no attachments or ties. I mean, I'd come down to Florida, if you wanted the truth, to paint my mom's house.
Oh.
So
Never left.
I did, and ultimately met my wife, so I ended up staying, and you know, started working down here. And so I had the money and had the time, so I went up to Atlanta at least once a month to spend time with Doug and my other extended household and training there. And it was, I mean, as I said, it was just a continuation of some really excellent training through the formative part of my fighting career.
That's cool. So have you always been involved in service too? I know you're a Pelican as well, right?
I kind of have. I mean, as I mentioned, my mom was heavily involved in the service side of the SCA when I was growing up. And that really just instilled that was just what you did. You know, the group wasn't going to run itself, you know, that there's just things that need to be done. And you know, everybody has to pitch in to do that. So it was never really a question of that was something that somebody else did. That's something that everybody does, and including me. You know, and you know, when I lived in Atlanta, I either cooked a fair number of feasts or had worked under some laurels who were, and that really kind of was my focus from a service perspective at that time, because I was a college student, and it wasn't probably not a good idea to put me in charge of a whole lot of stuff.
Right.
But that was how I participated on that side of things at the time. And, that was only amplified when I became Anton Squire. And really even before that, as I was spending time with him and his household, in that, Anton's household in particular, and the Moose Lodge more generally, since we all descend from Sir Forgall, that is a huge component of our culture as a household, and from the kingdom that we come from, is service, to the kingdom in different ways. So, I mean, again, that's just what you did.
Right.
And I think one of the things that Forgall and Anton are very proud of is that of all the knights that have come from that line. And I know there's huge households in the West that with 50 and more knights, but I think there are 30 or 40 descended from Forgall at this point. And for the East Coast, that's pretty big.
It's amazing.
And for Anton's in particular, and the Moose Lodge in general, about a third of the knights in the Moose Lodge are also Pelicans.
Yeah, when I talked to Ragnar, he told me the whole story of giving Forvald, is that right?
Forgall.
His Pelican and Trimeris working together. That was a super cool story.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Can you tell me what the Moose Lodge is and where the name came from? Because
Sure.
I've always wondered.
The Moose Lodge is the creation of Forgall and Anton. Anton was Forgall's squire, and Forgall's gonna be mad I'm telling this part of the story, but Forgall is a living, breathing, card-carrying superhero. He was in the Delta Force.
Okay.
If you've seen the movie Delta Force, and you've seen Chuck Norris's character, when he went into the burning helicopter at the end of the movie to pull two guys out, that really happened. That was Forgall, and I'm sure he has a medal that's classified from that.
Wow.
He's, like I said, card-carrying live superhero.
Wow.
But he's also a knight of much renown and respect in Atlantia. And Anton was his squire. And Anton's path to knighthood was very short. He was very driven. I think in those 2 years when he was Forgall squire, he averaged 40 some events per year. Might be more than that, actually. He'd go to an event on Saturday and go to a different one on Sunday. And part of that time he was in a wheelchair. They'd blown out his knees. So when Anton got knighted, and traditionally that was the time when the new knight kind of leaves the nest and goes off and forms their own household. And, neither Anton nor Forgall really wanted that. They had, they were, each other's best friend. They'd kind of found their tribe, if you will. And it would, and I'm paraphrasing, but it would diminish what they had if Anton went out and did, something different. So the Moose Lodge is really kind of what came from that, where they decided that they together would kind of form this extended household, that ultimately came from Forgall, but that, included Anton and Anton's squires, and has since grown as Forgall has had other squires be knighted, and Anton has had squires and grand squires and great grand squires all get knighted at this point. And that's kind of where it came from. The Moose Lodge name actually comes from Forgall, because his device is a moose head.
Okay.
Which might have a lot to do with his fondness for Moosehead beer at the time, but that part I won't swear to.
I love those old stories about how people chose their devices. That's great.
My mom has the MGM Lion.
Really?
No kidding.
Oh, that's awesome too. Did you said you had a brother, right? Did he end up playing or did he not?
I have two brothers actually. My middle brother, um, he's I think the going phrase these days is scary smart.
Oh, yes.
Athletic too, don't get me wrong. He also played baseball, but way scary smart. So while I was doing this kind of stuff, he went off to college and ultimately started building cryptography chips for spy satellites.
Oh, wow.
He was otherwise occupied.
Yes.
Um, my youngest brother actually did play for a while and ultimately squired to another Duke in Atlantia. But after he went to college and stuff, his life kind of went in a different direction, and he's aware of the SCA and whatnot, but he doesn't really play anymore.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about what kind of training you did down in Trimaris
Sure.
where you got knighted.
The the one of the things that I've always been fascinated by is the differences in the fighting styles from one kingdom to another, and really not just the fighting styles, in their execution, but the culture and the other factors that really have led to them. And the difference between Atlantia and Trimeris is, I think, a pretty classic example of that. Trimeris is hot.
Right.
Trimeris is really hot. I think the only other kingdom in North America that really experiences the same kind of weather patterns that we do is on Stiura, and even there depends on where you're at. But as a result of that, Trimerans tend to wear less armor than almost anywhere. When I first got to the kingdom, the typical body armor was a kidney belt.
Oh.
And most folks their leg armor was greaves and knee cops, and sweatpants were what was covering their thighs.
Wow.
And I discovered very quickly that this was not because they didn't have access to it or because of a stylistic thing. It was because if you wore a whole lot of armor, you were going to fall out. Not the first tournament I went to, but maybe the second or third, I was fighting and doing very well, and I'm wearing, typical Atlantean armor at the time. So I had a breast and back plate, a bassinet with a camel hanging from it. I had full steel legs, some plastic greaves that were covered in leather so they didn't look terrible, and I was very well protected and couldn't breathe. It was just so hot, and eventually it was a round robin bear pit type of tournament. So I got to a point where I was pulling out every one shot trick that Anton had ever thrown at me because I couldn't stand to fight any more than that. And I finally had to. My friend Ardian ultimately was the one that knocked me out. I thanked him, stepped over to the side of the field, took my helm off, and threw up.
Oh.
Because it was just so hot. And very quickly, I had to adapt to the temperature realities of living in a kingdom where in the winter, our average temperature is in the high 70s, low 80s.
Right.
And that can, regularly is mid 90s and gets up above 100 on a pretty regular basis in the summer. So my equipment had to be adjusted pretty heavily. My body armor lightened greatly. I couldn't do a whole lot with the helm because I just liked it so much. So I had to, my full leg armor got down to knee cops with a plastic cuisses, and even then, my first set of those I drilled holes in so that the air would go through. Looked awful, but I just couldn't stand it. I just covered with fabric, with pants or something so that you couldn't see it. But it was so hot I couldn't. And I did adapt eventually, but the full kit never came back.
Right.
And the training really is different as a result of that as well. Trimeris history, its culture at the time and since is very much oriented around kind of a boxing approach to fighting. Certainly at the time, there were very square stances, very much a boxing kind of stance. The face was a heavily favored target. At the time, they were not touch kill, but certainly not the positive force that I was used to coming up, and the full force that I know that the West and Ontario were using at the time. And not, if not there, then the thighs were popular targets because it didn't take a whole lot of elbow grease to land telling blows when your opponent is not wearing a whole lot of leg armor. So as a result, the training was heavily geared around speed and targeting. The sticks were lighter, because the speed was king to get to those targets, since blow force is probably 70% of Atlantia, what I was used to. But the speed was easily 110, 120%. Generally, I mean, there's outliers everywhere, but generally speed, 15, 20% higher in Trimeris, and another thing that I wasn't used to. So particularly those first 2 years, I learned a lot about foot movement, particularly lateral movement. I learned a lot on hand positioning. Basket blocking is very popular here for blocking the face. I learned a lot about efficient shield movement, because at the time, the kingdom had a law that the largest shield you could use in crown tourney was 19 by 32 inches, or as we call them, the postage stamps. And since that was the largest shield you could use in crown, most guys only owned a shield that big, which is not very large at all. Right. So everything was just geared around, you must be fast, and you must hit sufficiently hard, but more than anything, you must be fast and you must be accurate. So those were the things that that was not the focus when I lived in Atlantia. You had good technique, good power generation, a lot more open stance. The sword leg lead, which was just beginning down here, I wouldn't call it unheard of in Atlantia, but not popular at all, and relatively unknown. And that boxing type of stance was really the purview of some specific combatants. Most people from Atlantia at that time were descended from the old castle school of fighting. So very open stances, very regimented foot movement. Range control was very big. In Trimaris, range control, certainly the better you were with the fundamentals, the more likely you were to be successful. But by virtue of the stance, by virtue of the relatively square hips, the differences in those range bands were much smaller than they would have been in Atlantia or other kingdoms that tended to fight in a more open stance.
Yeah. So did you fight sword and shield? Is that your main weapon form?
I did. I fought sword and shield, and have fought sword and shield, my entire career, fighting wise. I didn't really start to get good at the other weapons forms until when I first became Kingdom Seneschal. I wasn't. I was training a lot, but I wasn't fighting as many tournaments because when I was at events, I was, doing Seneschal stuff. Right. So that really kind of took the pressure off to measure, my sword and shield against everybody else's, and I have a great love for greatsword fighting, particularly bastard sword or katana style greatsword fighting. So I did a lot of that, and I got reasonably good with it. Reasonably good with it. By the standards of the SCA in general, I think I'm above average, for most knight level combatants, and probably about average for royal peers, but maybe a little above that. But but that was where I got to when I was still Squire Martin back then. That was actually how I won my first crown, was with a great sword, for that matter.
Oh, really?
A sword and shield through the tournament, but in the finals. Against, oddly enough, our present king was my opponent in that crown tourney.
Actually, when I was looking through the past royalty of Trimeris, I thought that was funny that you're successing him again. But
yeah, that's the strange part is the first 2 crown tourneys I won were against him in the finals.
Wow.
And then I think his second one, maybe, I think he beat me in the finals to win that one. And then I fought in this one, with him and et cetera. So yeah, Kern and I are go a long way back.
So Anton's left-handed, right? Are you left-handed as well?
I am not.
Okay.
He's very left-handed. I actually fought left-handed for a good year and change. I was at a practice at my friend Duke Gregory's house in Tampa one year, and I was fighting Duke Bytor, who is Dan the Fireman. Many people who are watching this will know who that is. He's huge. He is in the prime of his fighting career at the time, 350 pounds of sweet throbbing Jesus. I mean, he hits the iron pile like crazy, just strong as an ox. And we, unfortunately, were throwing the same crossing shot through the middle for the offside at the same time, and our fists hit in the middle. And I got to experience what it feels like to run into both the immovable force and the irresistible force and the immovable object at the same time. So I couldn't hold a sword in my right hand for 6 months easily. Just the weight and being a doofus, I'm like, well, I can't hold a sword and do anything with it, but I can hold a shield. So I fought left-handed sword and shield for a good year while I was waiting for that to heal up, which was a year because I fought sword and shield left-handed. Would have healed a lot faster if I'd laid off, but also just a very humbling experience.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to lay off when you're in your 20s and go.
Hard to lay off, and particularly I think I was at 9 at the time, and this is after I won my first crown. But yeah, it was a very humbling experience.
So let's talk about your knighting. So you were put on vigil, and then a couple months later you got knighted. What event did you get knighted at? I
was knighted at Panhandle Skirmishes, which is an interkingdom war with us and Meridiers at the time. Since they've split off, it's Meridiers and Glenaben are usually in attendance. This particular time through, we also had I don't remember if he was the Prince of Atenveld or the Prince of Onstiora, but Duke Duncan was the prince of one of those 2 kingdoms, and he happened to be there. And of course, the Atlantean contingent, since I was getting knighted. It was, everything I could have asked for in a knighting.
Did you have a vigil there?
I did. Did the all night, set the vigil at sundown, up all night, my squire brothers and whatnot had worked with some of the squires from Trimeris, kind of blending some of their the traditions for the knighting ceremony between the 2 kingdoms. And so there's that's the tradition in Trimeris, is that the squire population in general does the guard duty. Atlantia tends to be more specific to your household since it's such a huge kingdom, so it kind of melded those together. All the accoutrements, because Atlantia at the time, they use a writ system now, but at the time it was more of a surprise.
Right.
You got knighted. I mean, you were announced, you went a vigil that night, and you were knighted immediately. Trimeris, I don't know if they've always worked this way, but certainly as long as I've lived in the kingdom, we work on a system where you are announced you are called up, and we are minded to make you knight or make you pelican, etc. And the crown will ask you, what event you would like to receive the accolade at, which gives you time to reach out to folks and etc. So I knew going in, and I'd had plenty of, not going into the announcement, but once the announcement had happened, of course, with the benefit of knowing, when I was going to be knighted and whatnot, I had ample opportunity to reach out to my friends and family, so that they had, that they were, even though I was being knighted 600 miles away, there was almost all of my squire brothers and many of my extended family were able to attend. It was, like I said, everything I would have asked for.
That's super cool. What kind of, did you get any of like Anton's legacy regalia or anything like that?
Yeah. When a Moose Lodge knight is knighted, all of the regalia is legacy.
Oh, cool.
And we're out of room now. We at some point need to make a new one, but we have the belt that Forgall was knighted with.
Oh,
that,
wow.
that belonged to his knight, Olaf Askildson, Duke Olaf. And down the back of the belt, on the back, are carved in the names of all the knights that have been knighted with this belt.
Wow.
And there's well over 40 names on there, might be 50 at this point, and maybe more than that. So that's I was the fifth or sixth knight of Anton's line, and the 16th or 17th, I think, at the Moose Lodge overall. Maybe further down than that. But all of those names were in that. So I'm looking at that, in the vigil, because I'd never seen the back of it before that. We're all knighted with the chain that Forgall was knighted with.
Wow.
More often than not, the sword that we're dubbed with is Forgall's sword, which I think has been the sword of state for 7 kingdoms now, something like that.
Wow.
We get around. But yeah, all of the only thing that wasn't legacy when I got knighted were the spurs, and they were a gift to me from Eldred. I still have those also.
That's cool. I love all the tradition there. That's super cool, because it makes it so meaningful when that belt gets passed on to the next person.
It really does. Because the first time I saw, I was already in regardless. I mean, just from my relationship with Anton and with Forgall and all the other knights and the extended family of the Moose Lodge. But the first time I saw a Moose Lodge knighting, I'm like, yeah, we're doing something right. And it was really, I mostly became Anton Squire, not necessarily because I wanted to be a knight, because I didn't really understand what that meant and what the responsibilities and benefits and whatnot to go with that really are. But I wanted to solidify or formalize the relationship that we had as a teacher and a student. And I wanted to make sure that it was very clear that this is the path that I was going down, as a student, and that this is who my teacher was, and that's where my focus was going to be in learning how to fight. But the first time I saw Moose Lodge knighting, I'm like, now I want to be a knight.
I chose well.
I did choose well.
So from growing up in the SCA and then getting elevated as a knight, did it feel any different to you being on the other side of peerage?
Yes and no. Part of my experience with that is that I was knighted somewhat late in the cycle that one would typically see for a combatant coming up. I mean, it's certainly unusual for, certainly at the time anyway, it was unusual for someone to be in serious danger of winning a crown tourney before they got knighted.
Right.
I don't know about other kingdoms, but that was unusual for Trimaris. To my recollection, it was unusual for Atlantia at the time, and the East from before that. It just, certainly not unheard of, but I would say that within the cycle of those things, that I was well established in my my fighting prowess by the time I got knighted. And I think there's a combination of factors that went into that, because my kingdom central at the time, so my focus is in other places, and lingering effects from the relationship stuff between the two kingdoms, although I largely put to bed by then. But so that, combined with the fact that I grew up in the SCA and I'd always known peers I had never not, and I always had been the 10-year-old kid sitting in the corner while they're talking about peer things and the stuff that goes with that. Some of the mystery that goes with that was lost on me. I just I know what this part of it is, but there's really no one and no thing, however much we may want to do that with squires and students who are coming up. You really can't understand the responsibility that goes into being a knight, or a pelican, or a laurel for that matter, or a master of defense, until you're actually there. Mostly because of the responsibility that you then have to your kingdom, to uphold it and support it, whether you agree with the decisions or not. But also because at some point you are going to become responsible for not only the training and the education of your students, but also more than likely you will become responsible for the tenor and the quality of their SCA experience. A large part of how they experience this game and whether they enjoy it and how they come up in it and who they become known as is influenced by their teachers. So I didn't understand fully what that responsibility was when I got knighted, but certainly I knew it was out there. I just didn't understand the breadth and depth of it. And thankfully that was something I learned pretty quickly.
Well, I would imagine, because right after you got knighted, you won crown, right?
Yep.
So compounded on that is shaping the kingdom culturally as well, right?
Yeah, that was particularly coming from a kingdom that was culturally very different from Trimaris. And as a participant, I'd gotten very used to that, and I understood the cultural differences as a participant, as a player, if you will, in the game of the kingdom. But as a leader of the kingdom, I had just a knight for maybe a month when I won crown, and the additional responsibility, that I had been adjacent to, when Anton was king, or when Kuhn was king, or other folks that I knew that I had worked for and worked with through their reigns. It's one thing to see it; it's quite another to live it. So that was in retrospect, telling a 20-year-old not to do that is silly. Even with the benefit of that knowledge now, I would advise someone to space that out. But I think the odds of that are pretty low. But in retrospect, I wish that I had taken another 6 months at least to more adequately understand what the duties and responsibilities of a knight were before I went and won another crown. But to be honest, I didn't know that I was going to win. I knew I was fairly good. You can't be a knight and you have that kind of false modesty. I knew I was fairly good, and I knew that I had gotten to the finals in the last one. But I also knew that I had a style that was different than everybody else's because of where I came from, and that was going to go away. And they would figure out, as I became more, oh, that guy's winning some tournaments. What's he doing? Let's figure that out, so that, I knew that was going to go away. And I thought, I'm going to fight in this crown, and I'm going to get some valuable experience, and and I'll call it a win if I can get to the semifinals. And things worked out, and I advanced undefeated through the winners bracket, and got my first losses from Kern. I think in best of 5, I think we actually went to 5. And to be honest, it's probably better that it worked out that way, because if I'd understood where I was and the gravity of it, I probably would have choked.
I was going to ask if you've ever had a problem with, mentally getting yourself in the right place for a tourney.
Rarely, mainly because of my sports background. Thankfully, I've had the opportunity to be involved in some fairly high level athletics. And, that was even then, sports psychology was fairly new at the time, but that was a big part of prep work, was the mental preparation that goes into being able to perform at your peak level, at this specific day, at this specific time. I would not say that I was great at that part by any stretch, but I, was familiar with that and knew enough about it that and I've only gotten better at it now. I'm very good now, especially, but even then, when I'm fighting, particularly when it's a money fight, as far as I'm concerned, the rest of the world does not exist. And I am very patient. I mean, we in that first crown tournament that I won, I fought Duke, and we had a single bout that went almost 30 minutes.
Wow.
25 minutes of which was me and him staring at each other, with just a shift of weight, because within the first 3 minutes of the bout, he had demonstrated that his body mechanics were vastly superior to mine. His footwork was vastly superior to mine. And that if we continued to just trade blows, I was going to lose, and lose badly. So I waited and changed my strategy, and was like, I'm going to have to make this a game of mental fortitude and hand speed and accuracy, because those are things I think I can win. But if I continue to fight like that, he was going to beat me handily. And thankfully, he blinked first that particular time. He's beaten me many times since, so he's gotten his. But that was how I won the first one. But that same approach has done me in great stead for many years.
Well, it's very intellectually smart to be able to assess the fight while you're in it like that, and be able to change your game plan.
Yeah, I'm a mutant like that, though.
Well, good, you're a thinking fighter.
Was it the second crown tourney? Yeah, second crown tourney I won. I knew I was going to face a fighter who was better than me. Who just, better is maybe the wrong, but I'm a big believer that when you get to a certain level, things ultimately come down to matchups. And he had a style that checked all the buttons for finding my weaknesses. And, I knew that he had some openings, but I wasn't very good at getting to them. So for 7-8 months ahead of that crown tourney, I knew he liked to hang his arm a little bit, here and throw from here. So for the 6 or 7 months leading up to that crown tourney, the very first thing I would do every time we fought, and he lived in the local area, so we fought a lot, was I would throw the hardest, gnarliest, fastest flat snap I could throw at his right arm every time.
I figured that was what you're going to say.
Every single time for months. And we fought in crown tourney, and I lined up for it. He stands out to do the thing. I looked at his arm, and I hit him in the head. Only worked once, but it only had to.
Right.
I'm the kind of mutant that will set that up for 9 months.
I was going to say that's like a 9-month setup. That's pretty crazy.
And the fact that that's not the only time I've ever done something like that, including this last crown tourney I just won, that's just the kind of mutant I am.
Interesting. That's very cool. I don't think I've ever talked to somebody that's strategized about it for that long of a time. That's really neat. So culturally in Trimeris is the finals usually best 3 out of 5 and mixed weapons, or was that just your first?
From what I've seen from the other kingdoms that I've lived in and from visiting other kingdoms, we tend to have a bit more variety in the Crown Tourney finals formats. We've done best of 3, we've done best of 5, and even within best of 5, who's choosing the weapon and whatnot has varied over the years. I mean, generally speaking, you can count on best of 5 these days, but it's not a given. And certainly it may be Crown's choice for the first weapon, or it may be the one who came from the victor's bracket, or the reverse. It really just depends on that particular crown and how they want to see that go. So
there was a pretty big break between your last crown and the one that you just won. Did you decide at a point that this was the crown you wanted to win, and then you started planning like you said?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I'm on the wrong side of 40, approaching.
We all are.
So, and that sounds terrible to say, but I've gotten to a point fighting wise where, with a fairly few exceptions, if I'm fighting in a crown tourney, I expect to be in the finals. And I apologize for the hubris and the arrogance in that statement, but it's just been my experience that that's how it's worked out.
I don't think
I've always won them, but I haven't lost very many. That time period between my second crown and this third one that I just won, my kids grew up, and so I spent a lot of time doing things with them. I was on the board of directors. Was during a fairly pivotal and somewhat tumultuous time for the SCA. I'd gone back to college and gotten a master's degree. So a lot of life stuff.
Great.
I was always, very heavily involved in the SCA, but I didn't really have the time or even the inclination, if you want the truth, to sit the throne again. It wasn't my focus.
Right.
But as I'd gotten, my wife and I had a really great experience, with our second reign. The first one was a lot of work. My oldest daughter was in a car accident.
Oh, wow.
The first week we were king and queen, and I mean a very serious one. And so we flew out to Adenvelt, and she was in the hospital there for about 2 months, and always indebted and grateful to the kingdom of Adenvelt, by the way. For those of you from that kingdom who are watching this, very grateful, and particularly the Phoenix area, which is where we were at. But that, combined with being a first-time king, and many of the issues that come up as your king and queen, made it such that we really didn't enjoy that reign very much at all. And I knew I was getting to the age where, I can do the training to win more crowns. The fire in the belly that I had in my 20s is harder to do now, a lot harder. And so I wanted to win one more so that we would have one more reign that we both enjoyed and were able to do all the things that we didn't quite get to do, or other things that were important to us. And I mean, I've told a ton of folks in the kingdom when they ask that I think I'm I'm going to do this one. Granted, I didn't expect COVID to be a thing. So that may change my plans. I doubt it, but I was going to do this reign. I was expecting to be Pennsic King, but that didn't quite work out. And then I was probably going to retire from fighting in crown tourneys, and focus on teaching, teaching more fighting. On I have some artistic pursuits that I'd like to spend more time with, and not that I would stop fighting by any stretch, but training for a crown and fighting in those things is, if that's what you want to do, that's your focus. You can't do anything else.
Well, that's what it sounds like. I mean, because you sound like such an intellectual fighter that, if you're planning like for nine months, you're setting things up. I mean, that takes a lot of focus and mental.
Yeah, but in fairness, I did that before I even knew I was going to fight in the crown tourney.
Oh.
I just knew it was going to come in handy one day.
Okay.
Wrong kind of mutant.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about reigning before I keep you too long. Sure. So we can skip the first reign if you want. But what's your favorite part of reigning in Trimeris?
Oh Lord. Trimeris is a great kingdom. I mean, we have a lot of advantages that other kingdoms don't have. And commensurately, we have a lot of disadvantages as well. We'll talk about those too, but we are a kingdom entirely encompassed in one state. And not quite all of it for that matter. The Panhandle belongs to Meridies. But we are entirely encompassed in Florida, and as a fairly long, fairly skinny state, if you live in the center of the state, as I do, near the Magic Kingdom, the majority of the events that I needed to go to are within 2 hours of my house. And most of the kingdom events are within 45 minutes of my house. The ease of access is a luxury that I know not everyone has. The other thing is that, comparatively speaking, we're a relatively small kingdom. I don't know the exact numbers these days, but 700 and some odd paid members. So we know each other. We see the crown regularly, and the crown sees the populace on a regular basis, which allows them to, if they choose to do so, to develop a fairly close relationship with the populace in general for the time that they're on the throne. Conversely, we're surrounded on three sides by water, so we don't get a lot of cross-pollination of ideas, whether they be fighting or otherwise, from other kingdoms.
Sort of isolated.
I'm sorry?
Sort of isolated.
Yeah. We are relatively isolated in that sense. I mean, of course, in these days with the internet, that thankfully has been mitigated quite a bit. But certainly when I first got here, we were different, just because, we didn't travel as much. It was, you got to go 6-7 hours before you can even get to the border of the kingdom, let alone go anywhere else. Pennsic is 20 hours from here if you're driving straight. Even Gulf Wars, which, the war at which we're a principal, is 11 hours from my house. And if you live in Miami, it's another, 5 on top of that. So getting to other places to see how things work in other kingdoms is a challenge. And bringing those ideas back to the kingdom. And we're very familiar with our crowns. So it takes extra effort to, sometimes to create the atmosphere and ambiance of a very regal, very magical, very formal, and I say formal not in the pedantic sense, but formal in the sense of creating an atmosphere that creates that air of specialness for the folks who are attending the courts and whatnot, because we're so familiar with the crown. It's because that's Greg, who's I fight in his backyard, and now he's on the throne, and it's work to say, not just say, hey, Greg, how you doing, as opposed to, Your Majesty, what may I do for you, and that sort of thing. So it's but it's a great kingdom, great kingdom, friendly people, close people, both close like family. So fight with your siblings, but woe be unto anyone who messes with your siblings. All the things that go with that. That is us.
That's cool. So this third reign, is there anything in particular that you want to do that you didn't get to do in your other reigns, besides be king at Penzic, which didn't quite work out?
Yeah. I had specifically fought so I wouldn't be king at Gulf Wars, but I don't think that's going to work out. Gulf Wars reigns a lot of work for us.
Yeah.
The principle. It's also the winter is the heavy season for us because it's cool enough to do stuff, and the kingdom, I wouldn't say it shuts down, but there's a lot less things going on over the summer where it's active everywhere else. So,
so is your turning season pretty much in the winter?
Yeah, we really kick in fall coronation, which under normal circumstances would have been a couple of weeks from now, is really the beginning of the tourney season for us. And that will run, through the first or second week of December, fairly active. There's a break there. A short break for Thanksgiving. There's a break for Christmas. And then one of the biggest events of the year is New Year's weekend. And that really kind of starts the second half of the tourney season, gets to Gulf Wars in March, coronation's usually in April. And then the end of the tourney season is Crown Tourney in May, Memorial Day weekend. There's other tournaments going on after that, don't get me wrong, but the bulk of the tourney season is before that because it's just too hot.
Yeah.
In some cases, dangerously hot to be fighting. And we also, we start fighting much earlier than most kingdoms. It's not unheard of for us to have tournaments that start at 9 in the morning and are done by noon because that's before it gets stupid hot.
It's like in Atenveld, they have their Sunday practice at like 8 a.m. or something, which is
right.
Yeah. So I totally distracted you. Is there something that you want to do this?
There's a couple of folks that we thought had a good chance of becoming of completing their journey to peerage during this time frame, and so that was something that was important enough to us that it was worth fighting in the crown and doing the stuff with that. We also there's some cultural drift, if I can call it that, away from some of the traditions that have made our kingdom great that we would like to reinforce. And I think our current crown actually is put a lot of effort in that area as well. I don't want to overplay that. I think we're both the current crown and ourselves are we are certainly not in the drifting away from the current trends and whatnot. It is more that there's quite a few folks, both old and new, who quote unquote miss some of the good old days, and so there's some concerted efforts to try to recapture some of that and bring it back to our kingdom. So,
make sure that the important traditions don't get lost.
Exactly.
And you can institute new things and still keep the old. So, what is your favorite tradition in Trimeris?
We have a couple that I'm really particularly fond of. Probably one of my favorites is, it's more endemic to the culture. Is we have this notion of midnight meat, which is kind of strange, but frequently at events, late into the night, many are in their cups or otherwise entertaining themselves and whatnot. But it's not unusual to see someone break out a grill or something at 11, 12 o'clock at night and grill stuff up. And for the folks that are still awake and socializing, it becomes a focal point, for telling tall tales for deeds done that day, or debating the issues of the day within the kingdom, etc. It's just a great cookout kind of atmosphere, and I've always enjoyed that.
That's cool.
Very much.
Like a midnight barbecue, and you get the drunk people full of food, so that.
Well, that you don't get to be my size without a little bit of work.
Okay. Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you want to talk about?
For me, I mean, to be honest, I'm not that interesting. I don't understand why you're interviewing me. So for me personally, there's not a whole lot. What I would say is that at the risk of shameless plug stuff, having been on the board and having seen firsthand what goes into running the organization, I have nothing but admiration and respect for the people that do that. I know that you had interviewed John the Bear Killer some time ago, as the president of the SCA currently.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy.
No joke. He's one in a million. But I'm sure many of your viewers have seen the communication recently from the corporate office about membership, and it's very easy and true, which makes it even harder to realize that without events going on, that we are not all able to realize all of the benefits of membership that we are normally accustomed to doing. And that as a result, our membership is down some 20-some%, 28, I think. But, having been on the other side of that and administering the SCA, I would just remind everyone that the SCA corporate office, other than non-member fees, non-member surcharges, gets no revenue at all from events. They're solely from membership and things sold through the member services office. And what they do is critical to the operation of the SCA. It's the kind of thing where when it's done correctly, you never see it. And it should be that way. The only time you see what's going on with the corporate office is when something goes sideways. And the people that are involved in that and do that work are very much deserving of our respect and our admiration. And for this organization, which has given me personally so much over my life, and I suspect has done the same for many other people in the SCA, I would just urge as many people as possible either to renew their membership so that they will be able to maintain those benefits going forward, and so that the SCA can continue to do so. And if they have the motivation and the means to do so, I know that there is a significant movement across the entire SCA to sponsor memberships for people in your kingdom or for people in more generally. I know that the corporate office is set up to do that. In our kingdom, ourselves, my wife and I, and our current crown have each committed to sponsoring the memberships of 10 members of Trimeris who are being adversely affected by the current circumstances and paying their membership. We'll do it completely anonymously so that there's no issues there. And I would just encourage as many other people as may watch this to consider renewing their memberships and doing whatever else they can to make sure that when we come out of this, that the SCA is able to bounce back and come back as strong, and if not stronger than it was going in.
Yeah, one of the themes or threads through almost all of these ducal interviews, as well as the sister interviews that I do with my sister, are the friendships and basically chosen family that people get out of the SCA. And really $35 a year it's cheap. And a lot of people are like, I don't know what it does. What does it matter? Like, it keeps it going, that you get to keep your community. So anyway, I am 100% behind you.
Well, and
I
with
pledge
the
to sponsor somebody, and I will do that.
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And you hit it on the head. The motto for the Moose Lodge is the family you choose.
Yes. Oh, really?
Yeah, it is.
So I think Bryce is actually one of the people that told me that I had to talk to you, and I think that you are more than you think. So there's that. But if I were to go to Trimaris for an event, which event would you tell me that I had to go to? I could not miss.
Some of that's going to depend on what you like. I mean, we have great fighting events through the whole year. There's usually usually might be too strong a word, but there's frequently a masked ball at there's an event called Baronial Bash in the Barony of Wivenwood, which is the Tampa area in Florida. They have a masked ball, or have had in years past, which is great fun. Then there's in Oldenfeld, which is the Tallahassee area, they have a Yule event that is not to be missed. You know, great fighting as a gift exchange, you know, the white elephant type of thing. It's just a great, you know, great close-knit group that doesn't mind sharing that feeling with the folks that come to visit. Really, there's depending on what your interests are and what time of year you want to go, you know, I could certainly put you to anywhere in the kingdom and say you should go to that one or you should go to this one. Notwithstanding that our coronations and crown tourneys, you know, one of the other benefits of being a kingdom that's so tight knit and comparatively small geographically and population wise is that most of our population goes to coronation and crown tourney. You know, so 600, 700, 800 people at those events is not unheard of, and you can see everybody.
Cool. We're just a friend of mine and I are going to make a bucket list of an event in each kingdom to hit. And
tell us when you're coming.
Okay.
When you're coming, when you get time, I'll take care of everything.
All right. Let's look at your killing tool. Let's look at your sword.
Sure. So this is the sword that I primarily fight with. I understand Zen Warrior is selling these now, but I actually got this from Michael of Bedford, you know, 20 some years ago.
I say that's old school.
Yeah. It's 36 and a quarter. It is barely too long for me to swing at, you know, beside my leg and miss the ground. I'll catch it, you know, just barely. I don't use a thrusting tip generally, although I have a different sword that I use that does have a thrusting tip. It's a little difficult to see the handle within the, particularly with the junk I've got in here. But I carve my handles to have a little bit of meat in the middle here, and to be thinner here and thinner here. I do that because for certain blows, I'm hanging on with these two fingers, particularly the front side blows. Frequently for offside blows, particularly deep offside blows, I'm hanging on with these two fingers. So depending on what I'm throwing and where I'm throwing it to, I want to be able to grip tightly with that part of my hand. And so I make sure that the grip is thinner in those spots, so that I can roll my wrist. I do a lot of wrist movement for what I'm doing.
Cool. Do you do anything special with your tape, or is it just spiral wrapped?
I really, really despise duct tape.
Okay.
Hey, particularly in Florida, in Trimaris, because it just gets gummy and nasty. So my friends turned me on to this. I don't think you can really see it very well in the camera, but
hexagonal.
It's a fiber tape. It's a fiberglass tape that's done in a mesh. I think it's made for sealing the edges of Tyvek wraps when you're building a house.
Okay.
But it's very strong. It's very cut resistant. It's very light, and the adhesive they use is strong, but doesn't get gummy like duct tape does.
Cool. Good tip for all of you people that live in tropical areas.
I don't remember the name of the stuff, unfortunately, but if you look for the tape that seals Tyvek, that'll be the stuff.
Cool.
I use a trigger. And the only reason it's not in this one right now is because I'm getting ready to rebuild the sword, so I cut it out. But I build my triggers very similar to how Uther does his, so they're deep into the webbing of my fingers, because I want that feeling of solidity particularly when I'm turning my hand over for something like that. I want to make sure that the sword is not going to slip.
Okay.
Because I don't grip hard until the end.
Somebody says it's called hurricane tape.
That's the stuff.
Okay.
That's the stuff.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. So let's do the final 10.
Sure.
If you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
Oh, wow. That's difficult to say. I mean, I have been fortunate to fight, many of the legends of the SCA. So the guys that I would like to fight that I haven't had a chance to are actually from your kingdom.
Okay.
The only fighter of note that I know the name of that I fought from Antir is Skeggy from my second reign, and you have some excellent fighters that are known throughout the SCA, and I just have not had a chance to cross swords with them. So there's quite a few from your kingdom that I would like to fight.
Well, maybe we can all head to Gulf Wars next year.
You should. It's going to be a good time.
Cool. Who would you like to see reign in your kingdom?
Probably Forgal.
Okay.
That would be, but granted, I'm biased, but probably Forgal.
All right. He sounds amazing.
He's a good guy.
If you could talk fighting with anyone in the world for an hour, who would it be?
And I can only pick one person.
Oh, you can say a couple people.
Sagan from the West, Paula Bellatrix, who I think is on tier these days. Yes.
Yeah, he's living up in an on tier.
Paul. I like talking fighting with Branos quite a bit. I always learn something new when I talk to him. Lucan from the East. Oddly enough, I enjoyed talking to Bela from the Outlands quite a bit, because I've watched a ton of his fighting on YouTube and gotten a chance to fight with him a few times, but the style is so different from what I'm used to seeing here in Trimeris, Gunnar aside, that there's just a lot of things I'm curious about with the sword and spear style, or the sword and Madhu style, that's very prevalent in their kingdom. And then there's Sven from Anstiora. I don't remember if he's king still or
no, he stepped down.
Stepped down. Okay. He's got some interesting things to say about Two Sword, so I'd love to spend some more time talking to him about that. I mean, it's hard for me to pick one person.
Yeah. I know you don't do Facebook, but have you checked out the Coach's Corner on YouTube?
I haven't. I really need to do that. I'm kind of a Luddite, which is weird for a guy who works in IT for a living.
I guess if you're on a computer all the time for work, this is like the last thing you want to do.
Kind of, yeah.
Okay. What is your favorite medieval-esque or period movie?
Oh. I don't remember the provenance of it, but there's a particular version of Joan of Arc in French, which I don't speak, so I'm reading a lot of subtitles. But the execution of the movie is very well done. The armor and the clothing are all accurate, and the acting, albeit I can't actually understand what they're saying for the most part, but the acting is very good, and I like that quite a bit. And it's probably neck and neck with the Franco Zeffirelli version of Romeo and Juliet for medieval movies for me.
Excellent. If you could add or subtract a rule to the rules of the lists, what would it be?
Truthfully, I think that we have an excess of rules. The only one I think we really need is, I think, Rule 6 of the list, which more or less comes down to don't be a dick. Can I say that on the? I guess I can.
You can say it. You said it. All good.
I mean, the other rules that we have, other than construction standards and that sort of thing, really are extensions of "don't be a dick." So,
I'm a minimalist too. So, what is your favorite tournament format?
oh, I'm with Uther on this. Don't mess with church. You know, double elimination. Bring your best. I did just something eminently attractive to watching, you know, the list go through with combatants who are bringing their very best, and the way that goes. That's the way I think it should be.
What's your favorite event?
Oh, that's going to be a tie between 12th Night in Atlantia and our Spring Crown here.
Okay.
Long weekend kind of stuff. A lot of social things going on. Some great fighting, and then just getting a chance to catch up with my friends and whatnot at either event, either one.
Excellent. If you could have any helmet in the world, regardless of cost, what kind would it be?
This is an area where I'm spoiled. I own 1, 2, 3, 4 helms, and I still have the Basnet that I first started fighting in, and they either all were made by me with Eldred or made by Eldred, so they're all really nice helms. I have other armor that I'm coveting, but for helms, I'm actually doing very well.
All right, excellent. It's Saturday morning at Estrella, and several people want to talk to you about last night. What did you do?
Well, a lot of that depends on whether or not my wife was there. Because if my wife was there, then I spent time with her and I went to bed early.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, I probably drank too much, told the wrong, said the wrong thing, more along the lines of writing a check that I'm then going to have to cash with somebody on the field.
Cool.
I don't do that much, but it does happen.
Who is your favorite fight ever?
Stefan von Dresden. I don't know if he still is, but when I was coming up, I don't know if it was him or Lucan or Uther who was the best in the SCA, but I thought it was one of the three of them. And he's the only one of those three that I haven't had a chance to fight extensively.
Yeah, he comes up a lot. He's one of the only guys that hasn't won a crown that everybody knows.
Oh, he hasn't won one because he hasn't entered them. He can win anything.
Right. Like it's like he doesn't care, I guess. I don't know.
It's just, I'm a big believer that almost everyone who has won a crown, and a lot of people who've been knighted, have done so because there is something that they do that is different from everyone else, that they excel at. In some cases by hand speed, in other cases by height, in many cases by body mechanics or other things. There's something that makes them stand out. The thing that I've always enjoyed about watching Stefan von Dresden is that the thing that makes him stand out is not physical. I mean, he's athletic, but not overly so. He's fast, but not overly so. His body mechanics are perfect, but they're not inhuman. He's just perfect in execution. He just makes no mistakes.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he would argue to the contrary, but
which is what makes him so good. Right?
Yeah.
So, and then the bonus question is, who's the cleanest fighter in your kingdom?
Oh, that would be a tie between our current king, Kern, and Sir Shay from Wyvernwood.
Okay. Very cool.
And good guys on top of that.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this has been fun, and I appreciate everybody joining us. I have a light week this week. I think the next Duke I'm talking to is Duke Johann the Black, and that'll be Friday or Thursday. I can't remember, but later.
Excellent.
So thanks, everyone, and see you later. Bye-bye.